development in terms of housing. So developers account for this lack of certainty in their financial models. Therefore, there's an increased return and they stop the marginal development from going forward. So the last slide that we went over, it covered how the restrictions within the city and the local development has an impact on demand, in addition to what we had talked about in the first slide with increasing jobs, etc. So now we'll be talking about two significant topics that were discussed in our paper, land hoarding versus banking. So land hoarding refers to when developers purchase large quantities of land without developing these land, and this increases market shares of the largest builders. So some developers, when they purchase land, they have the opportunity to not utilize that land. And over time, since London is such an attractive city, the value of that land increases. So this leads to weak supply responsiveness and an increase in prices, which is a developer's ultimate goal. A developer who's purchasing a land knows that that land will become more valuable over time. So instead of actually building a house there or any type of living facility there, they just leave it untouched. So this is a stronger version of land banking. To explore what land banking is, it wasn't specifically discussed in the article, so we had to use another resource for it, but it was mentioned as a concept. So in land banking, public authorities in London or anywhere else in the world where this is active, they may acquire, hold, manage, and redevelop property in order to use them for any specific community goals. So these goals can be to increase affordable housing or stabilize property values. It can be to convert these properties into retail, parks, open space for flood mitigation. So anything that is considered to be valuable for a community. So public authorities can also hold valuable properties until the community can develop them as affordable housing. They can rehabilitate, demolish, lease, or sell these property. So in conclusion, in London, the local/public authorities have a lot of control over what is being done with the properties. So whereas in another part of the world, there is enough supply because people have the freedom to build houses and purchase lands and do whatever with abandoned buildings, etc. But in London, there's a lot of restrictions and there's a lot of specific planning that is involved. So that is another reason why the supply can't increase with an equal amount as the number of people that are entering the city, which increases every year. So that was it for my part, and I will hand it over to Jack for our next slides.
The availability of mortgages in London varies based on a number of factors. So one of them is total household income. And not only in London, but other counties in the UK, the buyer can usually borrow up to 4.5 times their annual household income. Another factor is the value of the property. A house that costs £200,000 versus £600,000, there's going to be significant difference in how much they're going to be able to borrow. So the loan to value mortgages vary, and we're going to talk about this in the next slide. Also, the lender's estimate of what the buyer can afford, which is based off of credit score and other factors. So there are a couple different government loan programs to help individuals purchase a home. One of them is the Help to Buy, which is an equity loan scheme that assists first-time buyers when purchasing a new home. This allows them to borrow up to 40% of the purchase price for homes that are valued up to £600,000, interest-free for the first 5 years as long as they put down a deposit of at least 5%. And another government loan program is shared ownership. which is not as cost efficient. It allows the new buyer to buy share on 25 to 75% of the property and pays rent on the rest of it until they own all of it. Like I said, not extremely cost efficient, but it allows buyers to work toward purchasing a full property. Next, for the actual rates of mortgages in London. So in 2019, 40,800 new mortgages were delivered to first-time purchasers. The number of loans to home movers in 2019 was 27,000, while the average price paid for a home in London by first-time buyers was £442,400, and the average amount deposited was £143,000. So those two amounts have increased 29% and 42% in the past 5 years, respectively. So they've been sort of steadily increasing in not only the average amount, the cost per home, but how much money is getting put down. The average rate on 2-year fixed rate mortgages rose 0.44 percentage points between July and November of last year, from just under 2% to 2.43%. And most banks, especially during the COVID pandemic, most banks have removed mortgages with loan to value ratios of 90% or higher, because these tend to be way more risky. And the banks see this as a situation where the buyer may not be able to pay back all that they borrowed. And lastly, for the slide on demand-based policies, interest rates have a direct impact on the demand for housing. When the interest rates are lower, there's going to be more of a demand for housing. So the state of the London economy depends on employment or lack thereof, consumer confidence,